Hello, and welcome to the Special Needs Sibling Podcast, where we talk about what life is really like as a sibling to someone with special needs. I'm your host, Charlene, and today our guest is Lulu. Welcome to the podcast.
Hi, I'm so happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. And so I found you on Instagram at the same time I got your contact information through another sib. So I was like, oh, that worked out like perfect that the
That's
timing
awesome.
I was meeting you like right after she was like, oh, you should talk to Lulu. So super excited about that. Um, so I guess we'll just hop into the podcast. Can you lay out your family structure in terms of like you, your sibling, birth order, any other sibs you have, and who has a disability?
Yes, hi. So I'm the eldest of four. The second one in the family is my brother. We are 18 months apart, and he's autistic. And then I have another sister who's about 4 years after my brother. And then my youngest brother, who's maybe another 3 or 4 years after my sister.
Okay.
Um, yeah, so we're a big family. And I think the most interesting point of our family, which I love to talk about, is that I had a very different experience of having an autistic brother than my brother and my sister, who
Mm-hmm.
were younger than him and who saw our a different way of the way my brother was raised. So my family kind of went from a typical ABA approach, kind of severe and kind of um, fixing him and going for the norm.
Yeah.
And and this is back in the 90s, right? And then my siblings were kind of born into a home that was much more wholesome and holistic, and what can we do to support my brother and help him? So it's a very interesting dynamic within our family to see that.
Yeah, and especially because you and your and then yeah, you and your first brother, because you're so much closer in age also
Yeah.
versus kind of everyone else is a little more in general they're kind of more evenly spread out. So I'm sure that like changes some things too, just because like
Yeah, but
or
also
maybe
interestingly enough, we all had a very caregiver role with him,
oh okay
especially my youngest brother. And again, and I don't want to talk, on behalf of them, and maybe one day they can come and share their story.
yeah
Uh, but it's I just always find it so interesting how our stories are so different, right? We all have
yeah
such a different story of what it was like. We call my brothers Milo as a nickname. And so Milo affected us all in such a different way, but also a similar way. We were all caregivers, but we cared in very different roles and forms.
yeah and that's what I think as I've just gotten to meet more families, even like before when I first met other siblings. Like I remember when I first met a family that had more than just like two kids, one that was like neurotypical and one that wasn't. And it was kind of like, oh, like it's so that kind of I didn't know how to think about it because like, oh, what is that like if you just had another, not
Yeah.
copy of you, but just another person to talk to, and then you still have your sibling, and then it's been interesting to kind of see how some siblings like yeah, they're like aligned on certain things and they view things the same way, and there's other topics where it's like
Yeah.
completely different, but then your brother has like his own unique relationship with the three of you, which is
Yes.
also fascinating. Even yeah,
Yes.
so it's all part of like the big puzzle.
And
Yeah.
for the record, I really empathize with families like yours who don't have another sibling to really laugh about things
Yeah.
and complain to, because
Yeah.
if we're I can't count the number of situations, we're out on the street or somewhere public, and
Mhm.
something my brother does, whether it's embarrassing or awkward, or someone does something, says something about him, and just knowing that I have my other sibling around, it just
Oh,
makes it like,
yeah.
it makes it different, because whenever I'm alone with him, I'm like, okay, like, okay, it's all on me, it's all on me. But there's something about
Yeah.
having another sibling that makes it like, oh, it's all on us. So it's like
Yeah,
the
more of a
load is,
group group effort
Yes.
suffering instead of a lone ranger suffering.
Yeah, so I
Yeah.
really am, I mean, I feel with that because I know I was left a lot with my brother alone, and I know that's very different than when I'm with my siblings.
Yeah. And it's yeah, it's kind of its own interesting struggle too as like yeah, if it just being us, which I never really thought about it until like kind of we're talking about it now, just because there's so many things. I feel like as a general statement as a sibling, there's just things that go on in your mind already as it is
Yeah,
internally. But then the external factors of yeah, like I really just had like my parents to play with or that was it, right? Because my sister, because
yeah.
she's more, her motor skills when we were kids were definitely not what they are now. So even like
Hmm.
her playing catch with me was something that we had to like, I kind of had to teach her kind of like how to
Hmm.
catch the ball with like two hands and stuff. So now it's a lot easier. But I remember before I had to kind of be much more creative about how to play with her versus like yeah, if I had another brother or sister, you kind of just you guys can play together and it's not as much of a I don't have to ask my parents as much to play with me because then there would be like another person there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, ironically, there was still a big sense of loneliness that I had, even if I had
Okay.
my siblings. I think because I was the eldest, and that, so me and my sister have 6 years apart, which
Okay.
now seems fine, but maybe growing up, yeah, I think that loneliness of, okay, especially when you're young, how am I supposed to play with this brother or sister of mine? And you look at all of these other families and friends who play with their siblings and don't
Yeah.
even have to try. So I think, I don't know if you had that experience, but I know for me, I did have that. I was so scared to be alone, although my house was full. We were known to have a
Yes.
crazy house,
Yeah.
but I was always afraid of being alone. I always felt like I needed someone to play with because I guess I didn't feel fulfilled in that way with my brother, although I tried.
Yeah. Oh no, I definitely felt very lonely for her. And then it's interesting because it wasn't until I got older, a lot older, that I realized what
Mm,
that feeling was. Because I used to be, well, I was just scared of everything as a kid. Like I was scared of movies, I was scared of the dark, I was scared of strangers. Like there's a plethora of things I was scared of just as a general statement. And so one of the things was when I was probably like in grade school. So my parents had like remodeled their downstairs, and so they moved the master downstairs, and then me and my sister were upstairs. So the thing that used to like scare me, which I thought, which now I recognize as me more feeling lonely slash being scared of the dark, was that once they would put her to bed, which was a little bit earlier than they would put me to bed, just because it was just kind of easier to kind of keep her on a timetable. So the thing was like, she was in her room with her door closed. My parents would go downstairs, and then there's just
mm.
me. So it's just me like in this dark room upstairs, like
Oh
with
my
no one,
God.
and so that
Yeah.
used to freak me out. So I slept with nightlights for such a long time. Um, More so because I think I was scared of the dark, but also at the same time like I wanted people, like I wanted someone to talk to.
Yeah.
I wanted to feel safe because there would be someone like awake if something was wrong. Because and like we had like one of those like talking monitor things. It's like baby
Hmm.
monitors, but the one that I had was like a push to talk. So if I really got scared, and I could like call my parents just because I didn't have to go downstairs to go get
Hmm.
them. Um, but yes, I definitely feel that the loneliness is a very it makes me feel better that you also felt it even though you were with people, just because it's I think
Yeah, isn't
that was
that
a more
isn't that
common thing.
fascinating? Yeah, you
Yeah.
would think you would. I mean, maybe the level of, I don't even think so. I think it's just a different type. If anything, I think I sometimes felt even more lonely because my youngest brother and young and sister were very close.
Oh,
So
okay.
growing up, I kind of felt like I wasn't a part of their young gang kind of thing. They
Yeah.
had their thing going on. They didn't need their older sister. My brother and I are 9 years apart, so that's a lot.
Yeah.
Um, but I think what helped me the most was actually putting my finger on it, because now, as a 30-year-old mother and wife
Mm-hmm.
and friend to others, and knowing that a fear of being lonely is something that is still present in my life, but knowing that I can kind of pinpoint it to where it started, it kind of gives me more
Oh.
power over it, because then it minimizes it. I'm like, no, it's not real. It's just something that you had when you were a child, but you were never alone. Like, you're not alone. If anything, you have an even stronger bond with your brother than anyone else.
Yeah.
Um, but just, that's the thing, and that's why I'm so happy you're even doing this podcast. A
Mm-hmm.
lot of the times, and so many other advocates in the field who are siblings, it's really important work, because um, not only do our siblings need us, right? But if we're not good, they then we won't be able to help them. And then if we're not good, we're not going to have great lives. So
Mm-hmm.
unpacking all of that complexity, all of these emotions that we went through and are going through today is important to just making our future better. And I don't think people do that. I think it's scary, and we don't think it's important because we never think we're important as siblings, right?
Yeah, it's so much easier for us as siblings as a whole to just kind of like suppress our own needs
Hmm.
subconsciously. Like it wasn't until yeah, when the more so in the last like couple of years after I got married where I went, "Oh, like I can have an opinion and it's okay that I don't suppress my opinion because it's just so like that muscle is not exercised a
Yes,
lot
yes.
as a sibling because you just even if yeah even if I wanted to like ride at an amusement park or eat a certain food at a restaurant like it's like
It's like
my
you don't want to
choice
bother them.
is well yeah so it's not only that but it's like pick and choose your battles right like I can choose
Hmm.
to have the energy to like do something else or if my sister's throwing a tantrum and deal with that or I can choose to like do I really want to fight with my parents over if I want to eat a chicken sandwich like is that really worth the
Yes.
effort and it's like and in a regular household where everyone's typical it's like that's probably a normal fight that you have like oh I want pizza like what kind of pizza do you want right like it's a normal conversation but for us it's like if my sister only eats 6 things it's it's not a choice to it's not even an option right to eat something that's
Yeah.
not those 6 things it's not part of the equation but
Yeah.
it could be it's just but subconsciously you just like it's not worth it to do that.
Yeah. Yeah. I definitely, and I mean, I know that was one complaint my husband had, because he would ask me like, "What do you want?" And I'm like,
Uh-huh.
Whatever, whatever you want." And he's
Yeah.
like, "No."
Yes. Yeah.
It's like, "No, you get to choose." I'm like, "I don't want to bother you. I don't want whatever's easiest, whatever's easiest."
Yeah, yeah. Or I would
And that's
go like,
also
"Oh, I think
something
I
we
want this or
carry.
this or this." Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh,
So
that's
yeah,
so
we got to
funny.
work on ourselves, people.
Yeah, and I mean, I think that's a great transition into just talking about healing as a general statement. There's a lot of directions I think we could go with that, but I think it's like healing in whatever form that you do it in is just so important. Like I think there's so many things that I learned from going to therapy to talk to someone that it's like if I had not made a very intentional choice to go and to really talk
Mhm.
about like my sister and kind of like how I grew up and problems I have with like various things in the world, right? Like I'm pretty convinced that I would not even be doing this podcast, right? Because I'm at
Yeah.
a state now where I'm like, no, like is I feel much more confident and better in who I am as a person, and I show up very different because I recognize kind of like what you were talking about earlier, right? Things that I have due to growing up as a sibling, but that weren't inherently there. They're just environmental kind of
Mhm.
like nature changes, right?
Yes.
It's it's not anyone's fault for anything, but there's just things that happen I need to work through, but without
Yeah.
having any form of help, you can't really work through that. So right, so some people they'll like like going to therapy is obviously an option. There's people who do books, people who do meditation. There's a whole bunch of things, but it's so important to, especially I think as a sibling, to just be in tune with like who you are as your own
Mm.
person instead of thinking about how to appease the 10,000 other people who are out there.
Yeah, I'll never forget. I was probably, I don't know, 15, and one of the therapists of my brother sat me down and asked me, "How are you doing? Are you okay?" And I remember I was shocked and even appalled that someone would ask me that. It was weird. I was like, "What? First of
I
all,
know
why are you
I'm
asking?"
imagining it. I'm like, wait, what do I say? Like I'm thinking if it
Yeah,
was just like a
I'm like,
younger
yeah, of
version
course
of me,
I'm
I would be
fine.
like,
Like
what?
my reaction was like, of course I'm fine. Why? What's this question? Like, why are
Yeah.
you even? And I think, especially when you're younger, now maybe when you grow up, you have more. You can take a step back, but
Mhm.
I think as a sibling, first we have this instinct of this guilt that comes up of like, no, 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 I love my sibling, and
Yeah.
so sometimes the thought of us working on ourselves means that we have to admit that things were hard, and that's step one to healing, right?
Yeah.
And then step two would be, like we were talking about before, is yeah, admitting that we matter, in
Yeah.
some perspective. It doesn't mean that you don't love your brother or your sister. It's completely irrelevant. Um, and what helped me a lot is uh, understanding that it wasn't just me. So it wasn't like, oh, I'm the sibling, I need to work on myself. I saw that my parents needed to work on themselves. I
Okay.
saw, I started seeing that it was more of a, and that's one of our therapists who's now my mentor, who was really teaching this to us, where she
Mhm.
pushed us from moving from looking at my brother as the one who needs to be fixed and who has all the problems, and
Mhm.
to we all need to be fixed and we all need healing regardless of our path. And the sooner we get to see that this is collective work regardless of what situation we're in, then we'll all be better off and happier, versus all of us pointing and aiming at this one broken child,
Yeah.
when really we all deep down have a lot to fix in ourselves first, and then
Yeah.
everything would come along in a way.
Did you all go to see her together, like as a family, or did you just do your own individual one?
No, I think it was a mix of both. I think a lot
Okay.
of the we did a lot of behavioral programs with my brother, and a lot of it was collective.
Okay.
We did something called the Sunrise Program, which is a behavioral method that is really based on uh, the acceptance and
Okay.
love of autism, and is based on a very big belief that my family had to learn. And that's where the
Okay.
collective family part came, which was that
Oh.
happiness is a choice.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, so it was a
Okay.
lot of belief work that we went through, that my parents had to teach me, and which, for instance, with
Yeah.
my siblings, they were kind of born in that. So
Oh.
it wasn't really
Okay.
something new to them. So we did a lot of collective work in that way. And then individually, we all, however we could. I'm not going to speak on my parents and what they did. I have no idea.
Mhm.
But I just felt it was more of a emotion in a sense, and even just an understanding, whether I saw it or not. I just saw,
Mhm.
I understood that we all needed to work on ourselves, and that my dad was kind of, I could easily go to the point of seeing like, oh, mom and dad, honestly, you're as broken as my brother. Like, forget
Right.
it, shut
Yeah.
up. Like, all work on yourselves,
Yes.
okay?
Yeah. Yeah. Go take some time for yourself. Just
Yes.
go work on. Yeah. 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 I
Like
understand.
me, like all of us, and like I really
Yeah.
like that way of thinking, because then it it minimized like all the pressure and the problems. And um, yeah, I really held on to that.
Yeah, and that's so helpful. Like that's like I'm kind of thinking about like how I grew up and stuff. And we didn't do ABA cuz and I'm not sure why. I just know we didn't do it. And so it was this thing where we did like other types of programs and we kind of did some like other things. But yeah, the thinking about like that happiness is a choice that you make to accept kind of the situation is a I was like that would have been so interesting as
Mm,
growing up if we like had to shift that because it's even now I think about the situation that we're in like just as me and my sister as adults and I'm like wow like even now like I think we're quote unquote happier than before but that's the interesting thing I think for my family is that a lot of things feel from my perspective very circumstantial in terms of how my family in general reacts to stuff. So it's kind of like
mm.
something good happened, like we're happy. Something not so great happened, okay, we're like more stressed out, kind of on that spectrum, right? But to consciously say that, hey, I'm going to choose to be happy is in spite of your circumstances.
Oh, it was life changing. It
Yeah.
was life changing. It truly was. So I completely get what you're saying. It was we were very blessed to have been. It's it's what was his name? Barry, uh, Barry something. He has a whole book about it. And it's a pretty big program in the U.S.
Okay.
Um, but yeah, it was life changing, and that was a very big and I really account that to be the big difference between me and my other siblings is because I saw
Mm-hmm.
life before that, and I
Yeah.
saw the tears, and I saw the pain and the hopelessness,
Yeah.
and then the shift, how that shift happened, and then the posts, and they didn't really see that much. So
Yeah.
I
So they
get what
don't.
you're saying. Yeah.
Yeah, they don't know. Yeah, but yeah, just that, and that's. I think it just blows my mind because like conceptually it makes sense, but I think I'm just really thinking about like how hard life is just as a sibling in general, right? And then we're adding kind of if you're not making that conscious choice, it means you're subconsciously choosing to kind of just deal with whatever is happening
Yeah.
in front of you, and that's so hard. Like on parents, it's hard. On siblings, it's hard. On the person that has the disability, it's hard. And it's like this kind of this mumbo jumbo, like you know, like it's so many. It's so easy to have like a lot of negative feelings because it's just so hard.
Mm.
Because it's just life is just very hard. As
Yeah, and
yeah.
I think what we were taught that really helped me is one thing I never liked when I don't know if you got this reaction whenever I would tell someone my brother's autistic,
Mm-hmm.
they would tell me, "I'm so sorry."
Yes, I would get that, and I
As
hated
if
it.
someone, yeah, as if someone passed
Yeah.
away, and I'm like, no, it's
Mm-hmm.
still he's still alive
Yeah.
and breathing, and
Yeah.
and so this always stayed in my mind. And so when we were being taught this idea of choosing to be happy and of accepting, and that basically it choosing to love a diagnosis versus hating it would ultimately just make you happier. It was kind of like uh, the way they explained it was this is the path that would happen if you hated it, and this is the path that would happen if you loved it. The hardship will stay the same.
Oh.
The hardship is there regardless,
Okay.
but the way you would view it would be different. And so I started experimenting when I would tell people, I have an autistic brother, and they'll say, "I'm so sorry." And I'm like, "No, why the hell are you saying sorry? It's great. He's amazing." And then I would go on and say all the beautiful traits about him. Yeah, he does XYZ that are still annoying. And yes, he has meltdowns, and sometimes he's harmful to people around
Yeah.
him, but it's okay. He's great. He's learning. He's on a path. And then you would see people completely, you know, change their reaction, and they're like, "Oh, wow, I've never thought about it this way." And then you realize, oh, it's really just a mind game.
yeah, like you're creating paradigm shifts in people as you talk to them because they only know whatever media or
Yeah,
whatever
they know
exposure they have, which could be almost zero for some people because they just don't know how
most
to
of the time.
respond. Yeah.
I don't even know they knew what autism was. They were just like, okay, it's something like Rain Man, and they didn't really get what.
Right. Yeah. It, yeah, I remember like as I remember as a kid growing up, I would get a lot of like, "Oh, I'm sorry," or like, or a lot of blank stares where they would say
Mhm.
nothing. And I remember like I used to just be like, "Why is this an issue?" And as I got older, I was like, "This is really annoying." Like I don't, yeah,
Yeah,
she's not dead. Like it's not like she's a person. Like it's just like it's like saying, "I have a dog." Oh, like what kind of dog? Right? You kind of ask these questions
yeah,
about your dog, but you won't ask. Like it's not to say that they are like that, but it's interesting how people will connect more human attributes to a pet versus actual other humans, but they just have like a disability of some
yes,
sort, whatever it is.
yes, 100%. Yeah,
Yeah,
and I mean, we're not here to criticize them, right? Maybe they just didn't know what to say, and maybe we're
yeah,
here to educate people to know what to say to something like this. But
yeah.
yeah,
No,
maybe it should just be like, oh, okay, how old is he or how old is she? Is it, on what spectrum is it? Like, kind of, it's better to ask questions than give an emotion, I guess.
yeah,
Curiosity is better.
and I think that's the thing is I've gotten more into like my adult life. It's something where I know what responses I don't want, but I don't know what I want people to say. And I think that's the
Mm,
space where I'm kind of like it's I don't have the answers, but yeah, but education is such a big thing. And then at the same time it's kind of like, on the podcast it's this thing where there's so many different goals that it can achieve. One of them is just me meeting other sibs, hearing siblings tell their stories, and another kind of byproduct is that people just end up learning about our lives and kind of like how
yeah,
in theory how to interact with us, which is like not a golden ticket, but it definitely gives you insight because even the things that even my husband who's we've been together for a long time, there's things that I will talk to another sibling and then he'll when he listens to it he goes, oh, okay, that's what you meant, right? Because there's just things that I'll complain about or that I'll talk to and he goes,
mm,
oh, that like we don't know if it's just me or a sibling thing or whatever, right? But since he's with me, then he just correlates it to that. But I think the more that he's just heard me talk to other people and will listen to it, he goes, oh, like there's other people that also feel that it's not just my delusion of
yeah, yeah,
what's
yeah, yeah.
happening
No,
in
I
the
get it.
world. Yeah.
You reminded me once. My brother came to my building. We live in an apartment, and to get into the apartment, you have to put in a code. So we were seeing, he was able to walk to the building, and he has a phone, and I could see him from the window. I'm like, oh, he's here, but I realized he didn't have the code, so he's
Uh-huh.
downstairs, and I'm like, okay, what is he gonna do? Like, is he gonna think of calling me? And instead, he just screams my name. He's like, Louloua! And I'm just laughing. And he's knocking on the door, which is not my door, it's the building door, right?
Right.
And I'm waiting because I'm taking this as a teaching opportunity, right? To be like, is he gonna think of calling me? Like,
Right.
what's gonna happen out of this? And I don't care at this point, right? We're
Uh-huh.
30 years old. Like, I don't care if I get embarrassed by these things.
Yeah.
Like, okay, worst case, some neighbor or someone's gonna
Someone
come and
will
be like, what
mention
the
it
hell
to
is
you. Yeah.
happening?
Yeah.
But I remember that moment. My husband found it funny, but not. He was like, "What the hell? Like, just go talk to your brother." I'm like, "This is hilarious. Like, why are you not laughing?"
Right.
so then I, so then I like talk to my parents and my siblings. I'm like, "Guys, guess what happened?
Yeah.
Everyone's laughing,
Yeah.
but no one outside of that circle felt it was that funny. Like, my husband loves my brother, and he's been a part of our life, right? But
Yeah.
it's not the same. Like,
Yeah.
you laughed right now. That was awesome.
No, it's no, that's hilarious. Like you can't even make that up. Like I was like, oh, I wonder
Yeah,
what
yeah,
he's
it's a
gonna
real
do, and then
story.
I just yeah, I didn't see it
Sorry.
coming. Yeah, but that's great. Like,
But
and I
like, as
think
a
that's
sibling, yeah, these are things
yeah,
I think that honestly, just as a real sibling or someone living with someone like that, where you're used to having behaviors that are just like, what? Like, how did
Yeah.
this just happen? Yeah. So no, the work you're doing is important, and it is about
Yeah.
education. And I've always believed, and that's how I was taught, is we have to do our fair share to educate the world and tell them what we wish they would do and what we wish they
Mhm.
would know, but also not expect that the world's going to change and then think that the world is completely going to change and our loved one can stay exactly as they are. No, our sibling also has to learn to adapt, and we're here to help them and guide them. So it's like you're working on both sides, where you're educating people
Mhm.
from the outside, but you're also educating your sibling. This is how the world works, and I can try
Yeah.
to change my community as much as I want, but you're still going to deal with the world that is pretty big. And as much as we try to work on it, it's going to be hard for it to change.
Yeah, and I think in addition to that, there's so much to be said, but by like us doing the work for ourselves internally too, because it's just the way that we interact with the world then is also an evolving sphere. And I think for all the things that we learn about like ourselves or like our siblings or our parents or like or just other people in general, it's that's so educational, I think, to us too, just because there's stuff that I now realize, like, hey, like that bothers me, and there's
Mm,
other stuff that I recognize, like, hey, you're just being actually rude to everyone. And I think that's really helped me a lot as an adult, just because as a
mm,
kid, right, anything at all anyone on the planet would say that was negative connotation about my sister or autism or just like any context like that, I would just get upset. But now I
mm.
realize, like some people, they just don't know. There's other things that people just kind of like use language that they don't realize means anything. They
Yeah,
just think, oh, it's like me talking about Kleenex or like a Tootsie Pop. It's just part of their everyday jargon. And so it's helped so much that I've done enough work where I'm like, hey, like no, that's their choice. If they
that's
continue
awesome.
to use that to with me, then I can address it. But it's yeah, I think just having more I think
Yeah,
having more
people used to
compassion
use the
and
word autistic all the time. Like I don't know how it was in the US, but it's like they
mm-hmm.
would instead of saying like, "Oh, you're such a retard," they would say like, "Oh, like you're so autistic," like as
It's
a
yeah,
critique,
as
like as
exactly,
a
yeah. They don't
yeah, I
quite
just
use it
remember.
that way,
No,
but
they
it's
stopped
it's
doing that. Yeah.
getting yeah, there's other things that people say that kind of still get to me a little bit, but I realized that the more that I heard it, the more I'm like, oh no, I think like culturally it's just this thing that's happening right now that a lot of people are just using it. I'm like, I'm gonna let it pass, and then if it's ever really offensive to me, then I'll mention it. But I kind of just, hey, you don't mean anything by it. We're gonna just move on, and then I just kind of walk away. Sometimes I just walk away now because it's just easier for me to, hey, you can have that conversation. I'm just gonna stand over here
Have
and then
you
just
I
do
have a
something.
question for you. Have
Mm-hmm.
you had more um let's call them, painful or embarrassing moment. I don't want to say embarrassing because so I used to be sorry, my question didn't start right. I used to imagine scenarios in my head of what
Mm-hmm.
people could come and say to me and my brother that
Okay.
I found terrifying. So I was
Yes.
always prepared and always ready for some sort of backlash. Like for
Yeah.
some I was always ready for someone to say something to me.
Okay.
But the times where someone came up to me and my brother and said something
Mm-hmm.
happened less than I was scared that they would happen. Does that make sense?
Yes. Yes, it
So I'm
does.
I'm asking you, is that how you felt it too? That it was more like you were more scared of it than it actually happened? For me, it was a daily fear I had because we were in the same school.
Oh, okay.
So it I was always scared every day that someone would come and give me a comment. And honestly, I probably did get comments and I completely forgot them. My mom always tells me like you completely erased many years of your life.
Yeah. Oh, I was like, wait, that's another topic we should get into too about like suppression. But I'll answer your
Yeah.
question first before we go there.
No, because now I realize as I'm
Yeah.
asking you, I'm like, wait, maybe I'm saying that, but I actually suppressed everything.
Yeah. But I understand your question for sure. It's this. I'm like, I'm thinking about it, and I think the number I don't think I did it as frequently as you did, at least based on your description in terms of daily. I think my biggest I think I felt it more when we were in public spaces, like as a
Hmm.
family, because it wasn't. I wouldn't, because me and my sister went to separate schools for the longest
Okay.
time. I think we were only at the same school for 1 year, and after that, then my mom pulled her out just due to some other program changes and stuff like that. And so, because we were at separate schools, the only time that was with her, like in like the outside world, was with my parents. Like if we were like at a restaurant
Hmm.
or like at an amusement park or something like that. So I think I wouldn't imagine it in my head, but my body would be very
Mm.
anxious because I would be
Mm.
people watching. I think I was just subconsciously people watching. I'm like, oh, like don't look at it. I would kind of be like, don't look this way, or like if she made a sound, I'm like, ah, dang it, like don't look. So I wouldn't imagine what they would say, but I would definitely be more in of a anxious kind of panicky mode. But yeah,
Yeah.
I don't ever remember anyone coming up to us in a negative way. But again, could have been suppressed, but I don't know. But
Yeah, yes,
I
I
consciously
was
don't
about to
remember
say that, and I'm
anything.
like, I think as kids, I think kids used to do that to us. But what I ended up learning, like from all of these years, is our fear is so much stronger than what actually happens in real life.
Yes, I learned
Like
that
we're
much
yeah,
later
like
in
we get
life.
so scared when
Yeah.
like really nothing, like the worst case scenario rarely happens, and even if the worst case scenario happens, it's never as bad as we imagine it. And so I guess for us, like for me, the biggest lesson was because I think you and your sister are close in age too, right?
Yeah, we're 2 years apart.
Yeah. I think when you're so close in age, you feel like you're living a very similar life in like maybe in like just your milestones and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And so for me, it ended up being like, oh, you, I would look at my brother and think like, Milo, you need me to change. You're holding my fear. Like
Oh,
I got to a
interesting.
point where like I was like, I'm so scared of the world. I'm putting that on you, and you're not feeling it. You're not scared. You have zero
Yeah.
fear. And so then I started feeling like, oh my God, I'm bringing in the fear. Like am I causing things? Am I, and so then it quickly shifted to, oh, it's not you who needs to change. I need to let go of these fears and these
Mm-hmm.
anxieties that I have so that you can then live the life that you want to live. And so what if someone wants to come and say something,
Oh,
so
that's
what?
so
Like that
interesting.
was the kind of work that I ended up having to get to, where I really
Yeah.
pointed fingers back at me, and that it was all in my head mostly.
Yeah,
And
I
like
think.
because of the things
Mhm.
he made us go through, it obviously made it bigger in my head. But
Right.
the more it became big in my head, the more you kind of cause it even more. So then I just had to let it all go.
Yeah, that's interesting because I think mine isn't the it's interesting because I think the point of causation is different, but the all the consequences are similar.
Mm.
Because there was nothing that my sister did that would make me, because my sister's more nonverbal, so she can't really tell
Mm-hmm.
me or say anything to me that would kind of put me on edge. Um, so even though that's different, I feel that my projection of my fear outward was the same as yours, as well as the like pointing at myself and like, oh shoot, I could have done these things different or should
Yeah.
have done this. Like that part was the same. And I think in a similar way of like I didn't actually, well, what I learned recently was that I didn't even know that I could control my thoughts so that I didn't have to tell myself those things. Like I
Mm.
just thought they were all I just thought I'm going to live forever like in this hamster wheel of thinking that I should be this person or that person, and I learned recently like no, that's actually not how it works. That's a consequence of all these other things that have happened in my past.
Yeah.
But I remember once, yeah, just kind of learning about that and realizing that like I have fear, and I instead of me yelling at you, I can just say, "Hey, I'm scared of this thing."
Yeah.
And it can stop there. Like I don't need to keep yelling at you to project my fear out. And I think I did that for so long. Cuz I was just scared like earlier how I said I was scared of everything, but that and as a kid that's one thing, but that really affected my kind of like middle school, high school, college age because instead of it being like the dark or scary movies or whatever, which I'm still scared of scary movie, which is that's just I think I just don't enjoy those.
I don't
It's
either. Don't worry.
yeah, it was more of like I'm scared of this like me getting like an F or like me failing on our project or letting someone down or like not making it into the team or whatever like
Yeah.
that fear translated into all these kind of more other things and I would project out so much but now I realize like the minute I start to say, "Oh, you should have done this," I go, "No, like let me rewind. I am scared that this is going to happen. I'm going to die."
Yeah.
And then I could just then and that's it. Like
That's
it's
so
just me
powerful.
saying that. Yeah, and it's changed so much that I've been able to recognize like that is like a kind of like a pattern behavior that I've built in, but I can also undo it over time,
Yeah.
obviously.
Good for
Yeah.
you. Good for
Yeah.
you. And that's, yeah, we do have control over our thoughts. That's a big changing point in our life, right?
Mhm. Yeah. So much stuff. Was there anything else that you wanted to talk about?
No, I was just thinking, you got me kind of speechless because I was like, wow, I didn't realize, I wrote a book about my brother and his life and our life and now we have our online platform, All Brains Grow, about um, helping neurodiverse families.
Mhm.
Um, but when you do the work, you do the work, you do the work. And right now, I feel like I opened up and I shared some things. I'm like, oh wow, like I didn't realize this was all still there in my head. You kind of think like it's in the past, and then you just like open up the water just a tiny bit, and it'll just come right, come right out. Um, but no, maybe what I would like finish on is just to, yeah, I guess the theme of all of this was choose to love and choose to be happy, because
Yeah.
it's an unfortunate truth, I think, in living with a sibling who has some sort of challenge and autism. It gets better and it does not.
Mhm.
It's a constant, you we're constantly shaping, and maybe it gets better in our life. It got better because he didn't have meltdowns anymore and he wasn't violent anymore, but now we're
Mhm.
dealing with new types of things, and so it's just
Yes.
about under like the sooner we get that, we have to be there for them, and but we get to control how we feel about it,
Mhm.
and that's where we get to have a happy life with everyone.
Yeah. And I think to add to that, it's this thing where when we're choosing to be happy and we're choosing to accept and realize that like we're growing humans, like I think also that enables us to see change in our siblings because I know that was really hard.
Mm,
I mean, it's still hard now, but I think kind of I've realized now that as I've learned to kind of accept more how I felt growing up and how I feel now with my sister, it really gives me more. It gives me and her more space to go. She can have a different behavior now, and it's not the end of the world. Like it's not
mm,
better or worse. It's just different because I think I forget so often that she's also a human, right? Like just
yeah,
because she has autism doesn't mean that her autism is fixed in that
yeah,
way as an adult. But it's so hard to come to terms with that because when you're a kid, you're so used to like running after the door and like eating certain food a certain way, and there's all these like habitual things that you kind of do and
Yeah.
your body just remembers them. And I think,
Hmm.
with the internal work that we do and the choices that we consciously, with the intention to be better people, it helps me really realize that, like, she can be her own person and she can change habits, and sometimes they may be for the better or the worse, but at the end of the day, like, she can make her own choices too.
100%.
And it's
100%.
and that's a very different, yeah, it feels so different in my headspace than, me panicking, like, oh shoot, like, she just spilled a cup of water onto, like, something, and it doesn't, it's kind of just like, oh, I guess that's it. Yeah, you kind of got to roll with the punches a little bit
Yeah.
more in a more compassionate way than in a reactionary, oh crap, like, what do I do way.
Yeah. You're so right. Just respecting that they have a pace of change, and whether it's following our pace or not, it's theirs
Yeah,
to take.
yeah,
And
and
they are their whole person. And it's also easy to be like, oh, he's like this because he's autistic. No, he's like this because he's like that. There's a lot of traits that
yeah,
are just because of who they are and how they like to be. Um, and that's just, who do they want to be also growing up? That's something we have to take into account. It's not who we
yeah,
want them to be. you know we
yeah.
we dreamt
So
we
hard.
dreamt and worked on our brother to for him to talk, and now he will not shut up. Like, he is the biggest blabber.
it's it's
So
so
yeah, it's he loves it, and he needs to talk, and he needs to talk about every single thing that's going on, and it never ends, and that's who he is,
and
right? It's
what's so funny about that is my sister, she it's interesting because when she's with people in a group, she doesn't stop talking either. But what's fascinating is that because she can't talk in complete sentences, she just kind of just says random words and sounds. And she really likes imitating hand motions. And so she's really great at Zumba. Like, she loves it because, it's just, you're literally just copying someone, like, do dance moves, right? And so it's so funny because I talk with my hands a lot. And so I noticed that, like, when we're in a group setting, I'll talk, and I'm like, oh, okay, I guess we're gonna talk at the
that's
same
so
time.
sweet. Oh my god,
Yeah.
that's
And
so sweet.
it's something that I it's like a present to watch, because I'm like, oh, like, she was a participant, except, we stopped speech therapy a long time ago. There's all these things that come with that, but
That's
yeah,
so sweet.
it's so
Yeah,
funny and heartwarming at the same time, right? Because it's like, oh, you want to talk, which I want to let you talk, but I don't know what you're saying, but you kind of know what I'm saying, right?
that's
It's all
really
these
cute.
things, yeah,
I mean, yeah, only you get to live something like that, right? It's so
yeah,
special. Even with
yeah,
all the hardships, it's still such a blessing and such a gift, like you said. And um, all these things that, I wrote this the other day. Like, it's our job to love them unconditionally in that way. Like, and no one will be able to laugh that way, the way that you do at these things,
yeah,
and to love her and to find her cute, even though she can be, most annoying person on earth.
yeah,
um, we learn to love, like, on a higher level, which is beautiful at the end of the day.
yeah, yeah. It's definitely, yeah. The way that I love is definitely, like, has evolved and is changing it just as she changes too. Like, which is really exciting, and it's like, oh, they're and it's so cool, just, I think, just as humans, to learn, like, you think you know what love is, and then you're like, oh, just kidding, like, it's really all these other things. And I mean, there's a lot of, like, more typical, like, milestone things that also do that for everyone else, but I think just
Yeah.
with the siblings, it's a different, like, level of that in combination with regular life milestones.
Yes, for sure. For sure.
Yeah. So I guess, with that, are there any words of encouragement you would like to share with our fellow siblings out there?
I mean, I feel like I gave a lot already, but maybe you know, it's funny. I don't know if you feel this way, but whenever I go on and talk about like my experience, this
Mm-hmm.
guilt comes out, and I always get scared that people think it's because I think less of my brother, or and maybe just two siblings specifically, and even to caregivers, because I mean caregivers include us as well, but parents and whoever is the primary caretaker, it's important to let it out so that you can then love even more. Because if
Mm-hmm.
we keep closing everything and not admitting and not laughing about certain things that are difficult, then we'll start, like you said, to not see the change anymore, and we'll start having some sort of resentment, and we'll be annoyed, and then that love will kind of fade away without us realizing it. So um, yeah, if you don't have a sibling around you in your life who has the same situations, then if you can't find, I know that there used to be so many books I used to read like about other families, and that was always so
Mm-hmm.
helpful. And even just friends you have around who, even if they don't understand what you're going through, just sharing what happened today that was really annoying kind of moves that memory away from your head. And so then it doesn't become a thing anymore. And then you can keep on showing up for your sibling.
Yeah.
Um, and I know that's something I've always done, and that has always helped me to stay positive and to show up for my brother and for the community. And so yeah, I love my brother, and yeah, choose to love and choose to be happy.
Yeah. Excellent.
Thank you.
Cool.
I had so much
Well,
fun.
thank
That
you
was
for being on the
great.
podcast. Thanks for listening to this episode of the Special Needs Sibling Podcast. It's definitely a tough journey being a sibling out there, so I hope you feel encouraged listening to other siblings share their stories. Here's a couple of ways you can support the podcast. Number 1, tell all your friends. We definitely need listeners to listen to the show. Number 2, please subscribe wherever you're listening to stay up to date on new siblings sharing their stories. Number 3, you can support us on Patreon. Even a small contribution can help keep the podcast up and running. And last but not least, if you're a fellow sibling, please consider being on the show. We definitely can't keep this show going without you. Even if it seems scary getting your story out there, know that only you can tell your story, and that we're all here to support you. And even if you don't want to be recorded, that's totally fine. I'd be more than happy to chat offline with any of you out there who want to continue to build this community of special needs siblings. Until next time, this is the Special Needs Sibling Podcast.